Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we look at your word. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Now, we've done a lot in Acts, right?
Yep.
So we are coming in for, now we're starting. We're cutting through. We've done a lot in Acts. We know the breakdown. The word needed to be proclaimed in Jerusalem. Was it?
Yes.
Yes. Was it proclaimed in Judea and Samaria?
Yes.
Yes. Where are we now? Moving to the ends of the earth. For it to be done in the ends of the earth, we need to be in
Rome.
We need to be in Rome. And where are we with respect to Rome?
Not there yet.
We're not there yet. Are we moving there?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
We are moving there. Because what has happened in the last few weeks that will get us to Rome?
Paul wanted to talk to the emperor.
Paul wants his case to be brought to the emperor. Now, it's kind of interesting as Luke is shaping this story, as we think about what have the Romans and the non-Pharisaic and Sadduceic Jews, what have they been saying about the case against Paul?
Well, the Pharisees are in agreement with him about eternal life.
Okay, so we've got Jews, there are Jews that believe he's fine. The Romans, what's their perspective on Paul? Yeah, not guilty.
He's innocent.
Yeah, but
There's no cause.
they're not going to. We talked about Herod Agrippa last week, and Herod Agrippa's opinion was, we turn him loose.
Yeah.
But Paul knows he needs to go to Rome, and by gum, that's where he's going to go. Now, I think I've said it before here. I know I've said it as we looked at the Old Testament on Wednesday morning. We look at these are not stories primarily about Paul. This is not primarily a story about Paul or the church. It's a story about God. Because it's God that's driving this. So as we read it, we take a perspective that what happens here isn't just happening because people are smart or have made plans. Because it's God that's driving the story. And if Jesus says you're going to do this in Rome, you're going to go to Rome because God's in control of this story. Okay, and that's always something important to have, kind of put in the back of your head. Because sometimes we can read it and assume that it's just people. Well, it's not. It's the story of God. So we got Paul. Now, Luke is writing this to a church, right? And we've already talked about the churches going through struggles because it's been a long time since Jesus is gone and they expected him to come back soon and he hasn't been. And so Luke is writing to this sort of to explain to them why it's okay that Jesus hasn't come back and redeemed everybody, taken everybody home. Second coming, judgment of the world, resurrection of the dead. Luke is trying to explain why that hasn't happened yet. And his conclusion is the church has something to do before this is going to happen. So, don't sweat it out. It's not that God has forgotten about you. You just have a work to do, and this is how the work started. So you're kind of in this age of the church, where the church is spreading the gospel. Now, Luke also, as he writes this, wants people to read it, right? Because if he's writing it and nobody's reading it, it's kind of worthless. Now, if you were writing something that you wanted somebody to read, what would be some of the things that you might do to encourage interest in what you were writing? And I'm not talking about religious. I'm not talking about religious writing. I'm talking about any kind of writing. Or you as a reader, what is something that would attract you to a book and say, boy, I want to read this book? What would be some things in the story or in the book that would cause you to say, yes, that's one that I want to read?
Probably a little scandal.
Okay, a little bit of scandal, right? You want to hear a little bit of scandal. That would be helpful, right? Because that would attract attention. What else?
Beautiful people have to be involved.
Beautiful people would have to be involved. People that you can, beautiful on a lot of levels that you can look up to and such. Okay, that would be good.
Relevancy to
Okay.
what's happening.
You want something
Your world.
that is related to what's going on in the world. You don't want to read something that doesn't involve us. As we go through what we have here, just file that away as Luke is shaping the story again. You know, that maybe he's writing it, I'm not saying he's lying, but he's shaping the story to make it more, what's that? Yes! There's nothing wrong with writing something that's enjoyable. You know, good gracious. You know, I've been a preacher a long time. You know, if your sermons are really, really boring, you see a lot of people that are dozing.
Did you ever hear how people at one point, you know, there was a concern that kids were growing up thinking Bible characters were vegetables?
The Veggie Tales.
Because of Veggie Tales.
Well, you know, one of the things, and I've said this for 20 years or longer, one of the dangers, I think, and I think we need to be aware of it, is if we present Jesus and the Bible stories in the same way as we present Santa and Easter, and I mean Barbie, fairy tales, if they all look the same, why would we assume that when a child hit 13, he or she would say, oh, well, these Bible cartoons that look exactly the same as all the others, I'm going to take those seriously, but all the others I'm just going to sort of relegate to childhood. You know, I've grown past it. Nice, I enjoyed them, but I don't believe that anymore. Why would they? That's assuming a sophistication that I'm not sure kids have. And that's just a danger. I think we got to be real careful when we do it. You know, especially with things like Power Book and things that are really fantasy related. Okay, the kids certainly learn them, but you know, what are they going to do with them later? Is it another childhood story that they grow past? I don't know. That's always been a concern, and that's what you're saying. That's a real problem. Could be a problem. Okay, well, we're at chapter 27. Paul is going to Rome, right? What does Luke do right at the beginning of chapter 27? That is kind of interesting. He's done it before, but he's doing it again.
Moves to first person.
He changes to first person. Instead of saying just they, he starts talking about we. Now, when he's done it before, why? Why has he done this before? Because this is the third time he's done this. And I'm not talking about specifically, because that's not as important. What has been his purpose when he shifts to first person? Because then he'll all of a sudden shift back to third person.
Makes it more reliable, more a matter of a fact, I did this.
Okay, makes it more matter of fact, more reliable. Which means we're going into some material that Luke
Feels is really important.
feels is really important. Really wants us, the reader, to say, now you may have heard this. I'm telling you, it's true. You know, it's true. So that's, again, we want to file it away because there's a reason he makes that shift. It's not accidental. Okay, so and kind of what he ends up writing about is interesting that he would do that, consider it really important for us to listen to. What do they decide, this group, what do they decide they're going to do?
Set sail for Italy.
Okay, they're going to set sail for Italy. Why are they going to Italy?
Get to Rome.
That's where Rome. And there's going to be a lot of details about how they're going to get there, right? And so what do they, in a nutshell, what do they do? Who's
Asia.
Okay, they're in a boat, right? And they're sailing along the coast of Asia. Are they going alone?
No,
No. Who's with him?
Paul and some other prisoners,
Okay, you got some other prisoners, and who's looking after the prisoners?
a centurion,
Okay, you got a centurion, and what's a centurion?
Julius.
Well, Julius is his name. What is a centurion?
Roman soldier.
It's a Roman soldier. Important Roman soldier?
100 people.
Well, yeah, he oversees 100 people. That's why he's called a centurion. So he's more important than a sergeant, you know. So he's a Roman soldier. And again, Luke is shaping this story. What does Luke tell us about Julius? Right at the beginning, what does he tell us about Julius?
He said the Augustan cohort, that part?
Okay, well, he certainly is. What's his attitude towards Paul? What does he, as they're sailing and they get to the city of Sidon, which is a city along the coast, what does Julius do
Treated
with
Paul kindly.
He treated Paul kindly. By doing what?
Permitted him to go to
With his friends and
some of his friends so they could easily take care of him.
Okay, so we've seen this before, right? So Julius is a Roman soldier responsible for Paul and these prisoners. He commands 100 of the soldiers. But Luke tells us that he feels kindly, treats Paul kindly. Consistent with the way Paul's presented Romans? Yeah, boy. You know, Julius isn't beating Paul up. He's not treating him badly. In fact, Luke tells us he's treating Paul well and allowing him to visit. Okay, so they're on their trip, right? What happens at the beginning of the trip? They're sailing, and there's a lot of locations that they're going past. They're going past Cyprus and Cilicia and Pamphylia, and they're just sailing along the coast. What happens when they get to Lycia?
they find an Alexandrian
Okay, they got a ship from Alexandria. Now, as soon as we see it's a ship from Alexandria, we know something about it. What do we know about a ship from Alexandria?
There's going to be Egyptians on it.
Okay, it's an Egyptian ship. Now, that becomes really important. Why? What would that ship be doing if it's from Egypt?
Trading.
It's trading, right? In particular, what is it trading? We can even assume, based on history, what that ship was trading, and we're going to find out it's true. It's exactly right. A little bit later.
Cotton.
Not cotton. That's what Egypt's going to be important later. Grain. Egypt was the bread basket because of the Nile Valley for the Roman Empire, particularly Italy. So it is, what's that?
Where you at now?
Well, we are at verse 6. Verse 6. So he's on a ship, an Alexandrian ship. We're going to see later in the story they dumped the wheat overboard. So it's what Alexandrian ships do. They trade in wheat there. So it's a ship taking. So what the centurion has done is he's been on a ship, right? And they transfer Paul and the other prisoners to a bigger ship. And he's going with them
Right.
and his little cohort, his little group of soldiers to guard the prisoners. And they're taking this Egyptian trading ship to Rome. So he's kind of hitching a ride with them. Now to get there, where are they going to have to cross? What are they going to have to cross to get to Rome? Because they're still hanging around Asia Minor, right? What are they going to have to do to get to Rome?
They're going to get to the other side of Italy, right?
They got to get to the other side, which means they've got to cross what?
Streets.
They've got to go cross the Mediterranean,
Yeah.
right? Because they are now at just about as far east as you can be. They got to go west. They got to go west. That's where they're sailing. They're sailing across the Mediterranean Sea. That's the only way to get to Italy, right, to Rome. Okay,
Twice
so,
they say the winds are against.
oh, very good, very good. They are sailing, right? And as he writes, he's going into detail about this sailing trip, right? Because they're facing difficult contrary winds. Now, of course, they're sailing on a wind-powered ship. And you can go forward if the winds are against you. But Debbie, you were a sailor. You sailed a lot when you were younger. It's really, you tend to, if you're on a sailing ship, what direction do you go? Where the wind blows, you know. And so it becomes really hard if you're going against the wind. That becomes a challenge. You have to find another way to get there. And so they're facing some contrary winds. What island do they come to as they're trying to make it to Italy? Okay, they get to a place called Fairhaven, right? And it's on the island of Crete, right? And when they get to Fairhaven, and they're sort of docked, you know, they've gone there. The wind is contrary. What ends up happening when they get to Fairhaven?
A lot of time had been lost.
Okay, they lost a lot of time. So what decision do they have to make? And we're at 7, 8, 9 in that neighborhood. What decision do they have to make now that they're on the island of Crete and they need to make it to Italy at a place called Fairhaven? They have some decisions to make, right? They've wasted a lot of time. So what do they have to decide to do?
Stay for the winter or move
Okay,
on?
they got to stay. Now, why would they consider staying for the winter?
Because it's too dangerous.
It's really dangerous. They're on the Mediterranean. There's a lot of storms in the Mediterranean in the winter. So traveling in the winter is a dangerous thing to do. They have to choose whether to risk it or whether to stay. You know, find a good port. Evidently, Fairhaven isn't a good port. And, you know, to be in a storm, if a ship is in a storm in a place that's not secure, even though, you know, it's kind of landed, that's not good either, because it's going to blow the ship aground. So they need to get to a good port and just sort of wait out the winter. Who makes that suggestion? Okay, Paul makes that suggestion. What does he suggest?
They stay.
Let's stay, because if we don't stay, what? And we're at verse 9.
There's loss.
Yeah, loss of
Part of
cargo.
a ship.
Okay,
twice.
we're gonna lose an awful lot, right? And it's gonna be dangerous, right? We might even die, right? All right. So that's Paul's suggestion. Now, what is Luke telling us, the reader, then about Paul?
He's knowledgeable.
Okay, he's knowledgeable. He also must have some influence because he's offering this suggestion. Now, what does the centurion, though, end up doing?
Well, he talks to his helmsman.
Okay, and what does he tell? What do they end up deciding to do?
Well, the harbor's not suitable for winter.
Okay, so we can't stay where we are. We got to go. We got to move, right? And so what do they decide to do?
We'd have to see.
They go back to sea. Oh, Ed, you should be feeling very comfortable with this. They go back to sea, right? Because they're trying to reach what?
Rome.
Well, they're trying to reach Rome, but what are they trying to reach right now?
Phoenix.
They're trying to reach the city of Phoenix. And the city of Phoenix is on the island of Crete. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to go up the coast, which involves going a little bit north, you know, and go into a port that's sheltered. So if there are storms, the ship will be protected, right? Because it's a good port. So they take out. Now Paul says this is dangerous. You're taking a big chance. Even though Fairhaven isn't great, it's better than nothing.
It's wonderful.
Right, better than swimming with the fishes. So they take off and everything looks like it's going fine. What happens?
Storm blows up.
Winds of hurricane force.
Hurricane force. What kind? Well, everything was fine because the wind was blowing from where?
South.
It was blowing from the south. Man, it was pushing them right on north. But all of a sudden, what comes? A nor'easter, which means the wind is coming from where? Coming from the north, which is going to do what to that little boat?
Stall it.
It's going to stall it, or worse,
Break it up.
somewhere between stalling and breaking up, it's going to blow it. Going to blow it south, right? Because it's blowing in the other direction.
Go the other way.
That's right. The wind is going to take it away from the coast of Crete. And if they're floating away from the coast of Crete, they are now where? If they're being blown away from Crete, where are they?
The middle of the water.
They're in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, right? So in this little boat being pushed south, right? Now, I mentioned right at the beginning, Luke wants us to read this story. Maybe this is trying to engage us. This is kind of exciting. Adventurous, exactly. This is kind of an adventurous story. I mean, he could have just said, well, there were a lot of things that happened on the trip. Let me tell you about what happened when we got to Rome. He didn't do that. He's given us a blow-by-blow description of what's happening on the boat. And it's not like Paul is spending every day praying to God for God. He's talking about a ship caught in a storm. Were you ever in a storm, Ed? When you were out to sea? Pretty scary stuff, Okay, so the boat is being pushed south. Now, as they're on this voyage and they're not going to where they want to go, right? What ends up happening as they continue on this voyage? Do they continue to face storms? Oh, there's storms there.
Treacherous.
Yeah, there are a lot of storms, right? And it's so violent. What do they decide they need to do?
Throw some stuff over.
They need to throw some stuff overboard. And so they throw stuff overboard. That's a problem because the storms are so violent. What becomes a huge problem to these people on this boat in the Mediterranean Sea that Luke tells us wouldn't be a problem for us, but was a problem for them.
Not having food or what?
Well, they have a food problem, sure.
Cargo.
But what else? The cargo's over.
And tackle, whatever.
What can't they see?
Sun.
They can't see the sun
They can't
and
see
they
the
can't see the
So they
stars.
don't know which way they're
They don't have a clue where they are.
Ooh.
All they know is they're in the middle of a storm in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And they can't see anything in front, behind, beside them, and they can't see anything looking up. And if they don't have stars to see,
They done.
they're done.
Navigate.
They can't navigate. If they don't have the sun, they don't even know, they don't know even know east, west, north, south. All they know is they're caught in the middle of the storm. This is bad trouble. But we, the reader, that's right. If we were watching this on a TV show, we'd expect the music to get very dramatic. Or something like that. Maybe not. But this is a big deal, right? Now, but we're reading this. What do we know is going to happen?
Well, we know he's going to get where he
We
needs
know
to
he's
go.
going to get to Rome. We already
Eventually.
know that. So although this is exciting, we're not saying, is Paul going to make it? Is he going to make it? Because
We know he does.
we already know he does. We already know he does make it. So, but this is kind of exciting. And I, like I said, I love the way Luke is putting in these details that he didn't need to put in. Why is he putting them in? Gotta be to make this story exciting. Because there's no other reason to do it, to have this kind of detail.
He got a good buy on the skins of papayas at that time.
Well,
They just needed to fill them, you know.
well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he got the assignment, had to be,
Yeah,
had to be
so-
100 words instead of
more,
50.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so, and also, he's emphasizing how terrible the situation is, right? Because according to verse 21, as they're out in the middle of the sea, right? Can't steer, can't navigate, don't know where they are, storm raging. Now they've had to throw over cargo, they've had to throw over rigging, and that's really bad, right? Because now they're not going to have much control
Over anything.
when they do see. So they are in a bad situation. What makes the situation even worse? According to 21.
Paul stood up and said, I told you should have stayed in Crete.
Well, first
You should've
it
listened to me.
says they're running out of food,
Yeah.
which is not a good thing, in the middle of the Mediterranean, running out of food. Paul stands up and says,
Told you so.
told you so. Now, why
Yeah.
why would Luke include that?
Build up the suspense.
Well, he's building up suspense because he does that through the whole story. What else might he be doing? For us, the reader.
Well, he's letting us know that he knew better.
Ah.
He wasn't dumb. He was knowledgeable enough.
Luke sure as heck wants us to look at Paul and say, that's one smart guy. Luke wants Christians 40 years later to say, man, Paul was really sharp. He really knew what he was doing. Maybe someone was guiding Paul so that he would know this stuff. But Paul stands up. It's like Luke reminding us of what Paul had said earlier, that they should have stayed in Crete. What does he tell them, though, to do?
Take heart.
Take heart. Now, I told you should have stayed in Crete, but I want you to take heart. Why?
There will be no loss of life amongst you.
Okay. No loss of life.
But the God
But-
that I serve.
Because the
Okay,
angel
there you
of
go.
God-
How does Paul know this?
The angel came to him, right?
An angel of the Lord of God came to him and told him. And here we haven't heard much about God for a while, have we? Hadn't heard much about God. In this, but now we have. And who is God talking to?
Paul.
Okay. And through an angel, he's talking to Paul, and Paul is relaying the message
To the people.
to the people. Geez, just like he's been
Doing all along.
doing all along. He's continuing to share this word to the people. And who is this God? How does Paul define this God?
Well, he's
The God to
merciful.
whom I belong and
The-
whom I worship.
The one to whom I belong and the one I worship. And that angel from God said,
Don't be afraid,
don't be afraid. Why?
because you have to stand before them.
You got to stand before the
They give you
emperor.
safety.
And God's going to give you safety. What is Luke doing for us by having Paul say that? What is Luke reminding us?
God's in control.
That God's in control and Paul is going to go to Rome. How does what Paul is saying, how should that affect the crew?
To bolster
As you
it.
start believing him.
Bring the morale up.
Trust
Bring morale up? Maybe trust in this God? Okay.
He's trusting Paul.
But, what does Paul also tell him?
We have to run around.
The trip to Rome is not going to be a smooth one. There's going to be a detour along the way. Okay? All right. 14th night. 14th night they've been there in the middle of the sea. 14 days. Not being able to navigate, not being able in the middle of this storm. They've been drifting because they threw the rigging out when the storm was so bad. What happens? And again, Luke has given us all these details. In verse 28, what happens on the 14th day?
Taking soundings.
Okay, what is that? What does he mean by taking soundings?
Like a echo?
Testing the depths,
He's testing the depths. And when he takes the first sounding, what do they find?
25.
Now, it says the sailors suspect
That you're getting close to ground.
that they're getting closer. And how would sailors know that? Because sailors know the sea. You know, a sailor would know it. I wouldn't know it, but a sailor would. Because sailors know. Sailors know. They can feel. That's what they do. And so they start taking soundings. They find out how deep. And the first time they do, they find out that it's 20. You know, the depth is 20 fathoms. They take it again,
15.
and it's 15. Now, what is that telling them?
Good show.
Getting closer to ground.
Now they're getting closer to ground because it's getting more shallow. Which means everything is going to be wonderful, right? Heck no. Because now that they're getting close to land, now what? The danger was floating around in the middle of the Mediterranean. That's a bad thing because you're running out of food. The storm could crush your boat. You could sink and die. Now they're getting close to land. What could happen? You can run into rocks, right? And what's going to happen when you run into rocks?
Next hole.
You're going to bust up and sink and drown. So do you drown in the middle of the ocean or do you drown being broken up on the rocks? Okay, so you've got problems, still got problems, you know, but a whole new set of problems, right? Why is Luke continually building the drama of this? Because again, he doesn't have to do this. You know, he could just skip it all. Why is he working so much drama into this story?
Better story.
What's that?
Makes for a better story.
Makes for a better story. Makes for and makes the resolution
More exciting.
even more exciting. You know, if it's, well, we were drifting along and all of a sudden we hit land and everything was fine. That's not very good, right? But we were in a storm, you know, and we were getting close to the rocks and we break up in the rocks. And even to make it more exciting, what do some of the sailors do? This is so dramatic. We got a Roman cohort, centurion with his cohort, we got some prisoners and we got some sailors. What do some of the sailors do?
Well, they end up cutting the rope.
Well, they get scared, right?
I try getting rid of
You know, in verse 30, they're getting scared, right?
Jump ship.
And they jump ship. What do?
lower boat.
They lower a little boat, right?
Yeah.
Because they are trying to get off this ship because they're afraid the ship's going to break up and they're going to die. So they're trying to take this boat. They know they're close to land. You know, they're going to take the boat ashore. What does Paul say? As these sailors, these experienced sailors, we're not talking about guys off the street,
Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.
which is saying, Paul is doing what here?
Laying this message from the
He's
angel.
laying a message from the angel. He's a message that even experienced sailors who are doing what they believe will save them, because they know the sea better than those Roman soldiers, and should know it better than the Apostle Paul, because he ain't a sailor, but he has greater knowledge than they. That they need to stay. You need to stay on the boat
Stay put.
to be saved. And what do the soldiers do?
Sounds like they stay, right? They cut the lifeboat loose.
They stay on the boat and they cut the lifeboat loose.
Where are you at for that?
32. What does it say in your translation? 32.
Then the soldiers cut away the ropes off the skip and let it fall off.
Right. So the people who abandoned ship, the Roman soldiers let them go. You know, cut them loose.
So they're not gonna be saved.
Don't-
basically.
Well, that's what Paul says. You got to stay on the boat to be safe. Now, it doesn't say they found the bodies of the sailors on shore. You know, it doesn't say that. Sailors just got. But Paul says we need to stay. That's what he's cutting the ropes. So the Roman soldiers cut the ropes.
Because they want to stay and be saved.
Yeah, they are going to, but they are not jumping on the boat. They're not going overboard.
Right.
They're trusting what Paul said. They're going to stay on this ship, even though the sailors have decided to escape and go to shore. I mean, that's what he says. Okay, now, So Paul is there, the Roman soldiers are there, the centurion is there, they're running out of food, right? Verse 33, just before daybreak. Now, why is this just before daybreak? What becomes significant?
It's the best time of the day.
Oh, it's a
It's
wonderful
darkest
time.
before dawn.
That's right. They're not in the night anymore. Light is starting to shine. You know, all this symbolic stuff. You know, that's at the resurrection, the women came, not at night, but came in the morning. So the morning is wonderful symbolically. The light is coming out. And what does Paul say? Now, we're still on the 14th day. What does he tell them?
Eat.
You gotta eat something. You need to eat something. Because you need it to survive. Now, Paul is saying this, right? Telling him you need to eat food because you're not going to be hurt. You know, and you're going to need some food
To give you strength.
to give you strength,
Sustenance.
right?
And not a hair will fall off
And-
your head.
Now, what is be really careful,
I am.
Donna, because you're talking about
I know.
you're talking about we're talking about three people
I know.
that are follically challenged.
I saw that.
So yeah, we got to be real careful.
Give you one
You know,
shot.
not having a hair on our head hurt doesn't mean quite as much, but it still means something. So he's now. Who seems to be in charge now? I mean, we got a Roman. Yeah,
Paul
Paul
is in
seems to be
charge.
the one in charge, but we got a centurion, and that's a position of authority, and yet it's Paul that is in charge. And what do after Paul says, "Man, you need something to eat"?
They break bread.
Eat it.
They eat it. And how many people are there?
276.
We got, so this isn't like 12 people. There's a lot of people on this ship. And so they eat it. And then what do?
Like the ship.
Okay. They lighten. Now, before Paul, when they do that, how does how does Luke describe them eating? What does Paul do in 35
It almost
as
sounds
they
like
eat?
communion.
Almost sounds like communion, doesn't it?
Breaks bread and gives thanks to God.
So what is Luke suggesting to his audience?
Even at 50 years later, they still do communion.
Donna?
Still meaning in the meal.
There's still meaning in the middle.
Okay.
Boy, you nailed it. I think that's exactly what Luke is communicating. You know, that this thing that you do that's linked to Jesus Christ, man, it was done before. And we've seen it done before. That's what the early church did. They broke bread. Now, same thing. Paul is breaking bread and distributing it. That's what he's doing here. Little allusion to, I think, communion and the fact that this is life-giving. This is a life-giving thing. You know, that's what communion is all about. Okay, so they take the bread, they eat it, their hunger is satisfied, but they got to make it to shore, right? So what do? They throw the wheat off. They throw what they were hauling, which means when they throw the wheat overboard, the rest of the wheat, what are they in essence doing? They're lightening the ship. What else are they doing?
Throwing
Get
their
rid
money
of
away.
food.
They're throwing their money away. What else are they doing? They're not just throwing their money away.
Get rid of something to eat.
They're throwing away any possibility of getting anything. So if the wind blows them back to sea,
You're done.
they are done. They have thrown out the last of the food. In order to do what Paul said, don't worry, you're going to be safe. So throwing out the wheat is really an act of, it's really an act of faith. That they may not believe in God, but they believe Paul. And so they throw the wheat over to lighten the ship. What do they see in the morning?
They don't know where they're at.
Well-
Sandy Beach.
Okay, they didn't recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach.
Which he
Okay,
planned if possible to run the ship on.
okay. Now, what does this show? That in the morning, they didn't recognize the land. They don't know where they are because they've been floating around in the Mediterranean, right? Being driven by the storm. They don't know where they are, but they know they're close to, which they knew anyway. They knew they're close, but they could see the beach. And that shows what?
Man,
Shows land. What else does it show? That Luke really wants his people to know.
He knew what he was talking about.
Paul knew what he was talking about. Paul was right. And if Paul was right, that meant the angel was right. That the angel
would
was
be
right. What's that?
The angel would be right.
We would be sorely disappointed. And we'd be even more disappointed if Luke's wrote, the angel was wrong. The angel from God, oops. You know, Luke, that's not, we're not going to see that. Well, the angel gets it right 50-50. You know, he's batting about, 400, which isn't bad. Now, so they're going to run the boat aground, right? What do they do? And again, Luke is giving us all this detail, right? They cut the anchors, and they're using the anchors to do what? To slow them down. So they cut the anchors, which means they will hit the beach. And they're going to literally hit the beach, right? And they do, and what happens when they hit the beach?
They strike a reef,
They struck a reef, so the boat is
stuck.
stuck. Now, what's the problem if the boat has hit the reef and is now stuck?
Can't get it back out.
You can't get it back out. Why is that important that a boat float and not get stuck?
Get all those hundreds of get the centurions to get the 100 people out there and push.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of hard when you're in water on a reef.
Yeah.
To have people push,
Get the pole.
Yeah, it's not exactly like in Les Miserables where
No.
they're pulling the ship into shore.
How far away from land were they?
Well, evidently they're far enough that they're concerned about what? What's the big problem if the ship is caught on a reef? They want to ground it so that it's on the beach and they can get off of
The
it.
waves
But
are-
they're not there yet. What's the problem?
The waves are gonna break it up.
The waves are going to, see, when it's floating, the waves push it one way, the boat does what?
The other way.
Goes with the waves. Wave hits it the other way, or floats back. But if the boat is stuck, then the wave is going to do what?
Just start back.
Boom, boom. It's hitting the side. The boat can't move. So it's having to bear the force of the wave.
So what's that tell you?
What's that?
What's that tell you?
What does that tell you?
They don't have a way back to the big boat.
They don't have a way, one, to get off the land, to get back to sea because they're caught. What else does it mean? That boat isn't going to last too long. It's not going to be able to withstand the waves constantly pushing it, hitting on it.
How far, as far as distance miles?
Well, evidently, because we're going to find out at the end that they were close enough to swim. So they were close enough to swim, but they weren't close enough to walk. So it was off the coast. It was off the coast far enough, away from the beach far enough. What's that?
I don't know how far could they average? Would it be a mile?
Maybe, could
Half a
be.
mile? Because
Yeah.
you can't swim, normal person can't swim like,
You came for it was 5 miles.
no,
You know.
you can't hardly even swim a mile.
Yeah, yeah. So they were close enough to swim, but if they didn't make it to shore, if they didn't go, they were going to go down. If that ship broke up, why is that a problem?
They'll get down with it.
Then not only are they going to go down with it, it's not very safe to be in a ship that's breaking up, because what else are you going to have to deal with if the ship is breaking up? Man, you still got rigging and wood, breaking up. So it's not just the danger of being drowned. They're in danger of being
Killed.
crushed
Yeah.
by this ship breaking up. And that's what's going to happen. If the waves are just pushing that ship, and that ship can't move.
Wait a minute. How do you support this?
By what he says.
Well, where does it say that?
41. But striking a reef, they ran the ship aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the force of the waves.
So it's already happened.
It was already happening. The ship was breaking up, like the Titanic.
Yeah.
And the soldiers know that they're going to have to get out of this ship. They can't stay there. And so what do they plan to do?
Kill the prisoners.
Kill the prisoners. They're going to kill the prisoners. Because if they don't kill the prisoners,
Be set free.
the prisoners are going to run away. And who's going to be held accountable?
Centurion.
The soldiers, that little squad is going to be in big trouble if they let a shipload of prisoners run free. So they're good. But who stops them from doing that?
The centurion.
The centurion stops them. Why does the centurion stop them from killing the prisoners?
Because he wants to save Paul.
He wants to save Paul. And again, Roman presented in a positive light. And we know that the centurion are not going to kill the prisoners because Paul, one of the prisoners, needs to do what?
Get to Rome.
You got to get to Rome. So it can't, right here, it can't, and the centurion killed all the prisoners and swam to shore. Can't do that. But swimming to shore, once those prisoners hit the beach, what are they going to be doing? Man, they're going to be running away. They're not going to say, oh, here I am, going to stay a prisoner. Here, rearrest me now that we're on shore. The centurion, the soldiers are going to be in big trouble. So what do they end up doing?
They get to land.
Okay, they end up, those who could swim, those who aren't very good at swimming.
A lot of things.
The boat is breaking up, for crying out loud. So what's in the water?
Parts of the ship.
Parts of the ship. So hang on. Sort of like, again, Titanic, Yes, that's right.
Well, that was also pretty standard practice in that day with ships, is the ship never came to land. You rode a dinghy.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And
Because it is incredibly dangerous to have the ship immobile. If the ship is immobile, it's having to bear the brunt. And we're talking about, even though the ship was called Ironside, we're still talking about a wooden hulled ship. And there's only so much stress a wooden hulled ship is going to be able to sustain when the waves are hitting it. So you want a ship to be able to move with the way, and this ship wasn't, and it was breaking up. So that's what they did, So anyway, now they're on shore. Whew, man,
Boy, that's over.
boy, I'm glad that's over. And where are they?
In Malta.
Uh-oh. In the story, we don't know. Do they know? They don't know.
They're shipwrecked.
They are. This is not unlike a important historical event. That's exactly right. It's not unlike Gilligan's Island. They are now run ashore with a broken ship, and they don't know where they are.
They want to counter Indians.
They could encounter. Well, what's going to happen? And see, it was only going to be a 3-hour tour anyway, to get there. And so now they're going to have to improvise, build things out of coconuts and things on
And
the
radios
island.
out
And
of-
radios.
Yeah.
That's right. They threw over the wheat, but kept that huge wardrobe that they will be able to use once they get to the
So
island.
Lovey can change
Yes,
clothes.
can change clothes, 4 or 5 times an episode. Okay, but that's where they are. They are safely on land, but they aren't in Rome yet. They're not in Rome yet. And I bet stuff happens before they get to Rome. And that's what we'll look at next week. Okay, any questions? Love this. This is an exciting story. And I mean, Luke wants his story read. And so, a little bit of excitement doesn't hurt a story. In fact, one of the things that you see, this is the only Acts that's in Scripture But in the ancient world, in the early church, there were a lot of stories like this floating around about apostles. And I think I shared one with you. And a lot of them were adventure stories. I mean, apostles were fighting dragons and saving damsels in distress. And they were stories. And people wrote them because they used these figures that were important and created a fictional story about them. Now, were they true? Well, of course they weren't true. Was there any truth in them? No. And that's one reason why they didn't end up in the Bible. But they circulated because they were exciting. They were exciting. You know, there were stories about Jesus and his childhood that were exciting. And they circulated. They weren't true, but got people to read them, not unlike the cartoons we were talking about earlier that were made, you know, exciting cartoons so the kids would find them appealing. You know, and that's kind of what they did. And we kind of do the same thing. You know, when we make a movie about Paul or Jesus, you know, we have to put some excitement in there in the movie, you know, so that's what we do, which isn't bad. It's just not, it's not kosher. Excellent word, Bill. Excellent word. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us your word. Remind us that even in this story about shipwrecks and storms at sea and being lost and drama, you're still involved, and you are still driving this story. You are guiding this story. And I tell you, that's important for us to remember, because sometimes when our life becomes stormy and when we feel kind of lost and we are just plain not sure what to do, remind us that you're with us, not just when the water is still, but you're also with us in the midst of the storms. And just help us, even though that doesn't make it easy. And we may still feel lost and scared as all get out. We are definitely not alone. Help us to remember that. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. So, thank you.